Wow, I was muted. I don't know why. Share screen. Share.
That you'll get in writing, and it's entirely up to you whether you want to contact them. They are not to contact you.
He looks happy. He looks happy. I think it's an acquittal.
Okay. All right, we're back in the appearances as before with the jury upstairs, and they have notified us that they have reached a verdict.
Wow.
Anything before we call the jury down? Your Honor. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Not guilty on everything. I don't know what's happening with the audio. Sorry. Not guilty on everything. On everything. Okay. Should we? Okay. This was like impromptu, guys, just because someone texted me and I don't have a lot of time. I have a work call. Oh, the judge looks very happy. I have a work call at 2:00, but I just want to see the reactions. This is what legal analysis is all about. Like I said, it's the jury's decision. They get to make the choice. Okay, sorry, I don't want to miss anything. I can't see the chat right now, guys. I'm trying to pull it up. Yes, that's my cat. She's very upset. I can see the chat now.
For those of you in the audience portion, no, it doesn't need to be. There can't be any reaction at all, no matter how strongly you may feel. And it's understood that many people do have strong feelings, but we can't permit any kind of a reaction to the verdict. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of law enforcement here, and you will be whisked out of here if there is any. So just be aware.
Thanks, guys, for coming on here last minute with me.
Okay.
No.
Hello? Would you go down, please? Yes. Thank you.
Oh, you can cut the tension with a knife. Sorry for the dead air, guys, and I know most of you know what the verdict is. My apologies, but I don't want to skip past it and miss it by accident. Please be understanding. Um,
All right, members of the jury, have you elected a foreperson? Would you give your juror number, please?
54.
54. And has the jury reached a verdict as to each count of the information?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
One verdict and one verdict only.
Yes,
Would you hand all the paperwork to the bailiff, please?
this is the ones that we didn't know.
Everything. Yeah, thanks. May I see that too, please, Mrs. Chairman? Thank you. The defendant will rise, face the jury, and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled?
Okay, I definitely think his reaction was worth watching. And now I want to see what your guys' reactions are. I would actually like, especially because I don't have a lot of time to be on this live stream, I would especially like to go through your guys' comments and like see how you're feeling and maybe answer any questions that you may have. Before I get to that, though, I do want to say that I thought he would be convicted of some of the counts and not of other of the counts. And what I don't like that legal analysts do, I don't really think of myself as a legal analyst, but a thing that legal analysts do that I don't like is they'll take a position. There's a danger in taking a position. You could be right, you could be wrong, but they'll take a position of their position will be wrong, and then they'll pretend as though they never had the position, and that's not honest. So honestly, I thought he would be convicted of some of the charges. I thought for Rosenbaum, he would be acquitted and potentially convicted of the other charges. I did not think it would be a full acquittal. I did not foresee that he would be not guilty on all counts. I know other people did. I think a lot of people did. And the thing that's very interesting about that is that there's a legal standard called beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that it's the type of conscious decision that you should have in serious matters in your life. If you wouldn't pull the trigger on this serious matter, if you have reasonable doubts, you should find him not guilty. It's not, you're 100% convinced one way or the other. Another way to understand reasonable doubt is if you cannot, like, if you're not 100% sure what happened, if it's he said, she said, he said, and you're not 100% sure what happened, it should go to the benefit of the defendant. So if it's like, I don't know, if he was acting reasonably in this moment, but I really can't tell from looking at everything, then you should never convict the person. You should find them not guilty. So in that way, I think given my own personal difficulties with deciding what it should be on each of the counts, that's technically reasonable doubt. And so I can't say that the jury necessarily reached a wrong decision here, given the evidence that they had before them. And there's, the court of public opinion was tainted by the things that they knew about Rosenbaum, by the things that Rittenhouse said before and after the trial, by political, things. But the jury just heard what they heard, whether you agree with what they were allowed to hear. And because of that, they reached a particular decision. So I think that, given the amount of time that they deliberated, it doesn't seem like it was a knee-jerk reaction or anything like that. That I think it's just potential that there's a potential that the jury could not decide what the right, who was acting reasonably in each moment. You know what, guys? If everyone was acting reasonably, if the people that were trying to stop Rittenhouse were acting reasonably because they thought that he was an unprovoked shooter, and then Rittenhouse acted reasonably because he thought that they were going to try and come kill him, and all he had been doing was defending himself against Rosenbaum, that means that then everyone is acting in self-defense and no one is guilty. So again, it's really, really tough. And then there were also I think the way that I want to put it is the misconduct by the prosecution. So this is maybe a message to prosecute. I know some people think that the prosecutor never should have brought the case, and I don't think that's true, because I think they had probable cause to bring the case. And I think that given a better prosecutor, a prosecutor could have secured a conviction on some of those. And because you are supposed to protect the community cried out for it. And there was probable cause at the very basis for those charges. I just don't think they had a good prosecutor. And I think the prosecutor lacked an ethical compass. And that signaled to the jury. I think the jury picked up on that, where it seemed like the prosecutor was trying to play fast and loose. Even though most of the objections were not heard by the jury knew when things were getting objected to, and a lot of those came from the prosecutor. Some people even think that the prosecution, Binger, threw the case on purpose. I don't think he did. I think he's indoctrinated to dirty prosecution. And that type of prosecution should never be allowed. It should not be encouraged. And when jurors pick up on that, they will find a person not guilty because they think that the system is otherwise corrupt, and no one wants to participate in a corrupt system. There's so many reasons. And then, aside from my personal beliefs, every single person in that jury could have believed wholeheartedly, after looking through all the evidence, that on each of the complaining witnesses and two decedents, Kyle Rittenhouse is acting in self-defense. They could have had no question. Like, I have a question. I had a belief that he wasn't acting in self-defense with all of them. Maybe each and every single one of them saw that and said, no, that's self-defense on every single one of those people. And they're allowed to make that decision based on the evidence that they saw. And I don't think that we should think that the system is just over because of that. I really do think that a reasonable jury could reach the decision that they reached, even though it's not a decision that I personally agree with, nor one that I necessarily thought was going to be the outcome. There was evidence to support a not guilty, and there was reasonable doubt. Okay. So he was found not guilty. He was not found innocent, someone said, and I think that's a good point. So I'm going to go through your guys' comments. I also want to point out that I have a $4.99 super chat from Marissa Green. Thank you very much, Marissa Green. This is going to be very fast, guys. So like, I appreciate the super chats, but keep your super chats. I just want to talk to you guys. So someone said that there's no justice here. If it was justified self-defense, should the fellow rioters of the deceased be held responsible for felony murder? If it was justified self-defense, should the fellow rioters of the so basically, no, I don't think so, because I see what you're saying. So basically, people participating in a riot, and then that riot leading to a altercation, that altercation causing someone to have to act in self-defense in order to keep from killing someone, or to keep from themselves being killed, and they end up killing someone, is it felony murder? And I do not believe so, because what we have here is the assumption of risk. When you involve yourself in a physical altercation with another person, and that person has to act in self-defense, no one else can be charged with felony murder in your death, because you took it upon yourself to use deadly force against that person, and they had to respond with deadly force. So I don't think that there's any way to extend liability. So it doesn't matter what side of the aisle that you're on, Republican or Democrat, people for some reason want someone to be held accountable and for someone to go to jail. So it's like, okay, well, we told you so. Rittenhouse is not going to jail. Rittenhouse did nothing wrong. Rittenhouse was totally right. So the libs should go to jail. The rioters should go to jail. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's even a reasonable or rational thing to say. So opinions are welcome. Name calling and hate speech are not. Yeah, hate speech is not welcome. Name calling is not. And you're just wasting your time. And this is a short stream anyway. I just wanted to like talk to you guys. So there won't be any private prosecutions, because we don't do that in the United States, but we do civil actions. Kyle Rittenhouse can still be sued by the families of the decedents and by Gage Grosskreutz. And Gage Grosskreutz has already launched a lawsuit. And there is precedent for someone being found not guilty of a crime. There's plenty of precedent for that, yet still in a court of law, in a lawsuit, being found liable in the lawsuit. So the first thing that comes to mind most famously is the O.J. Simpson trial. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of killing Nicole Brown Simpson because the jury could not reach a decision that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They found him not guilty. And so the family of Goldman, I think the young man's name was, sued O.J. Simpson, and they won. And the reason that they won is because there's a lower burden of proof. So beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest burden of proof that we have in the criminal justice system, or in the legal system. I shouldn't say criminal justice system. It's the highest burden of proof that we have in the United States in a court of law. Okay. And then we have preponderance of the evidence and probable cause and things like that. So it's a lower standard in a civil case. I believe it's preponderance of the evidence, but let me just double check that. Yeah. So it's preponderance of the evidence, and basically it's just greater than 50%. So it's so in a civil case, to find someone civilly liable, it's by a the plaintiff has to prove that just 51% that the person is liable for what they're being sued for. So It can be intentional infliction of emotional distress, unjustified homicide, loss of resources, loss of consortium with a spouse, negligence, recklessness, fraud, all these types of civil things, they're proven on a much lower standard. That's why that's why the civil practice is like so blown up. There's just so many civil practitioners because it's such a lower burden of proof. It's preponderance of evidence. So certainly Mr. Rittenhouse could be sued by the families of the decedents and by Mr. Grosskreutz and potentially by the gentleman that was unnamed in the criminal case. And then that would mean that if he were to be found liable, he could very well not be, because like it's a 50-50 chance basically. If he were to be found liable, then he would be civilly liable. He would have to pay money and there would be no possibility of him going to jail. And someone can be sued and criminally prosecuted at the same time, or like the same person can be sued and criminally prosecuted out of the same set of circumstances, because double jeopardy does not apply to civil cases. There's no like it doesn't attach into the civil case. People are going to be hurting people over nothing now. I hope that that's not the case. The prosecution was awful. I agree. I just hope that we've learned something, because honestly, okay, so here's a non-popular opinion. The shooting of Jacob Blake is what led to the arrest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There were subsequently riots in Seattle and things like that. Guys, I want you to tuck in with me on this. I've got a little bit of a controversial take. So there was a difference in the protests that followed the killings of like the killing of Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. But there was something about the Jacob Blake protests, and I don't know if it's because these were people that were marching for Black lives that really didn't have much to do with the Black community. And you guys might not like this. It's just a thought that I've had for a while, where they took over the streets and were barricading the streets and stuff like that. They did the same thing in Seattle, and then they like seized the like downtown area in Seattle and everything. It's like it had nothing to do with Jacob Blake. Like those protests, after a while, they were about white grievances with capitalism. And it was like a more violent Occupy Wall Street type movement that had nothing to do really with the killing of Black people. And it became a proxy class war between rural white people, city white people with money, and white people without money, taking to the streets to air their grievances. If you notice in the protests in Kenosha, there were very few Black people there. A few, like one of the people that was shot at by Rittenhouse is Black, but most of the people that were shot at were white. And the two people that were killed and one that was seriously injured was white. And it's not to say that white people should not participate in protests in support of Black people and Black lives. It's like literally the opposite of what I'm saying. What I am saying is that, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the protest is the voice of the unheard, right? Protest and the riot is the voice of the unheard. That basically there are no other power structures for certain people to avail themselves of in order to protest the atrocities that are committed against them. And so they take up, this absolutely was about race. This absolutely was about race. Let's not be naive. To take up protests on behalf of Black people that were murdered or shot by police. This started because of the shooting of Jacob Blake. So this is absolutely about race. So in the converse of that, white people have a certain level of, especially white people of means, have a certain, because there's class differences as well, have a certain level of institutional power within court systems, businesses, things like that, where they can make systemic changes. Where dressing up in riot gear and taking to the streets and fighting with the police has less of a need or an impact and can be so destructive that it is counterproductive to what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to march for Jacob Blake, but instead you're setting your city on fire, and then the guy that is from the more rural area is going to come into town with his AR-15, and they're going to dress up like they're paramilitary forces, and you guys are going to get down and fight in the streets. What was it really all about in the first place, right? What was it really all about in the first place? Like, were we really protesting about Jacob Blake? How many people, I'm going to say this right here. Hold on. Quoting someone is not, first of all, this is an ignorant comment. MLK was not weak. Okay. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, he was integral to all of those things. There needs to be different members of the civil rights movement that serve different functions. It was MLK and Malcolm X. It was not either or. Okay. And we're not going to tarnish the legacy of MLK just to make a foolish point that's not backed by anything. When I quoted MLK, I did it very intentionally. I'm not weaponizing his legacy. People use MLK in order to try to say, and MLK, I mean Martin Luther King Jr., in order to say, oh, he was about nonviolence, he would have never condoned a riot. That is a lie. He literally understood the context of rioting. He thought that nonviolent action was more effective. He was right. But he said that there was a time and a place for riots, and the reason that they happen is because these people are otherwise unheard. You need to hear these people in order to avoid these riots. That's what he said. So understand context and take things the context in which they're said. Many people don't even remember Jacob Blake or know that he is the reason that people were protesting out in Kenosha, because the movement was co-opted, because it was turned into a proxy class war. And there's no way to get around the fact that some people, when they talk about this case, as much as we try to stay on topic with the actual facts that the jury is hearing, they come in here with agenda because they want to talk about, the libs and the Republicans and the this and the that, and they don't want to actually talk about the facts of the case. And the reason that is because there is a political underpinning to this case. So to ignore that is foolish. However, you have to also consider the fact that the jury saw the evidence that they saw, and the prosecution did not do a good job, objectively speaking. So the jury had evidence that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense. The defense brought forth a salient argument. The defendant testified that he was acting in self-defense. And the prosecution failed to meet its burden. And that's all it is. They failed to meet their burden. So Kay Bailey says that she went into this thinking he was guilty, and by the time the prosecution rested, she was convinced that he was not. And that's likely, some of those people on the jury probably went in there thinking, oh, probably he did something wrong. And then when they heard the evidence, they didn't think he was. Thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to us about this. Thank you very much for being here. Okay. Someone thinks the prosecution should be sanctioned. I agree with you. Thank you, mods. You should read Dr. Frank Wilderson's Afro-Pessimism. He argues that Black people are ontologically dead and that Blackness and slaveness are inextricable. I don't think I want to read that. That sounds horrible. That sounds like a horrible racist thing to say. Thank you so much for coming on the right way to help us understand. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. I want to see, I really think this was largely a failure of the prosecution. I think that they just, they took it seriously in George Floyd. They got special prosecutors who were adept at cross-examination, who could dedicate all of their time. It just seemed to me like the prosecution hadn't even rehearsed how to cross-examine witnesses. That cross-examination of Kyle Rittenhouse should have been devastating to him. It was not. They let a 17-year-old beat them on cross-examination. They asked open-ended questions instead of leading questions. It just wasn't a good prosecution. And then they tried to pull tricks. Now, I don't really think the video withholding thing was them trying to pull tricks, but a lot of other things were. Like asking him about statements that he previously made when the judge said, don't do that. And the jury picks up on that. They pick up, juries are not stupid. They pick up on the misconduct. They see it happening. And I definitely think this is why you should pay attention to who your elected prosecutors are. Try if you have the ability to, the time, go and watch jury trials in your area. Watch your district courts for your bench trials. See what your taxpayer dollars are going to, because a lot of people are allowed to just skate by and hide in prosecutorial and prosecution offices and not do their jobs. And I think that this was a horrible prosecution. I really, really do. And again, it could just be, and I want to be so fair here. It could be that even with the best prosecutor possible, it would have still been an acquittal on all the charges. But I don't, like, for example, the beginning of your case, your opening statement should have been, he was pointing his gun at people, he provoked people. They did not start with that argument. They kind of shoved it in at the end there. That should have been your entire case. But you didn't make it that. You wanted to make it about things he said beforehand and not what he was doing in the moment. Okay? I have so many criticisms about how the prosecution did their case. Thank you, J. Michael RN. It is important to not confuse protests and riots. Just as there is escalation of force, there is an escalation of redress of grievances. Yes, and also many of the protests in response to the shooting of Jacob Blake started as just pure protest. Like in the daytime, it's a protest. And as the night goes on, it gets crazy. Like I don't want to see, people saying everyone's a rioter. That's not the case at all. And it was a valid protest to have, but people started rioting and it had nothing. And people started rioting with their own agenda. And then people started showing up to counter protest with their own agenda. And it had nothing to do with Jacob Blake. Like those dudes standing out there in paramilitary gear, pointing their guns at people, which I totally believe they were doing, that had nothing to do with Jacob Blake. You were there to provoke something. You have to leave bias at the door when you're in court. It takes guts. Exactly. And you have to remember that each of those jurors were picked to see whether or not they could put their preconceived notions aside. I don't think I could have taken the nervousness of the verdict without you. Oh, thank you so much. You're so kind. Someone thinks the prosecutor needs to be disbarred. I mean, I don't know that they will be disbarred, but I would really think purposefully ignoring the judge's order not to talk about that previous incident is sanctionable. There might be some type of sanction for you for that. Yeah, so And I think that's what it was with a lot of people. The people that, myself included, it was like overkill. It was overkill. Yeah. And on the other hand, All About Roofing thinks that Rosenbaum died because he was going to kill Kyle. I don't think he was going to kill Kyle. I don't think that, but I don't think that Kyle had to sit there and wait and see if he was going to be killed. I think that Rosenbaum was just mouthing off, but what you're expecting for someone to think or know in that very moment is that this person is just mouthing off and they don't mean to do me serious bodily harm, right? Again, either way you look at it, and this is the one I definitely thought he was going to be convicted of. Everyone, like, it's very easy for people to focus on Rosenbaum if you wanted a conviction, but let's also focus on the other ones. And I don't think that those should have been a conviction if it had been a better prosecutor. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that I have a major problem with these vigilantes trying to police the streets and things like that. That is not your job, and you're not trained. Even trained law enforcement that have the best of intentions can make mistakes that are deadly. So I don't think that it should ever be up to civilians who are untrained to police the streets armed. I really think it's dangerous. I think that this verdict is going to lead to more vigilante justice. We have to watch the Ahmaud Arbery case because it's very similar in, armed civilians taking to the streets, thinking that they're protecting property and then killing people. But then again, here's another thing, is that even if Kyle Rittenhouse came there with bad intent, he could have come there with bad intent all day. If Rosenbaum provoked an altercation with him, used deadly force against him, and that led to Rittenhouse using his gun, which led to a stream of horrible events, the jury can still reach a conclusion that he's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. I think I'm about to wrap things up. Do you think Gage Grosskreutz will face charges of assault after the not guilty verdict? I know I disagree with you on the verdict, but I think the justice system was largely fair here. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't think the justice system, let me put that back. I don't think the justice system was fair here because we had a bad prosecutor who, even though the outcome, this is why the judge held on to the mistrial motion, because they would have been able to bring it back either by appeal or something else, more than likely. But the prosecution should protect Kyle's rights throughout the entirety of the trial in order for a conviction to stand up if it happens. And he was playing fast and loose, and I don't think that the justice system was fair in that regards. I also don't think the justice system is fair in general because most people cannot afford to will not have a $1 million GoFundMe that will have multiple high-powered defense attorneys representing them, and this should be something that concerns everyone, that unless you kill someone in a high-profile case, the person I'm talking to right now, you're likely not going to be afforded the same level of defense that Kyle Rittenhouse was. You're likely not going to have the resources to be out on a cash bond. Most people cannot. Most people can't afford I think in 2019, the average income of a single person was $35,000, something like that. Like, that's barely any money. Most people would not be able to afford these attorneys. So a lot of the reason why Rittenhouse got lucky is that he's not necessarily a person of means, but his case got so much media attention that he ended up getting money. And money does definitely help. You could get somebody like me, and I'm very serious when I say this, who is going to literally give all of their spare time, mental effort to your case, right? No matter what, no matter if you can afford an attorney or not, I'm going to be there for you. But for many people, that's not the case. They live in places in which you saw that case that I highlighted the other day, where the man was denied the right to a public defender, even though he was facing jail time and could not afford an attorney, right? So it's like, if you're in that type of situation, you're not going to get the same treatment as Rittenhouse. So although, yes, I disagree with the verdict in some aspects, I think he should have been acquitted on Rosenbaum and not the others. I don't think that the justice system is largely fair, and that's from someone who works within the justice system. But thank you for that. I'm really enjoying your guys' commentary. Okay, I've got 5 minutes. I've got one more super chat. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna go. I agree with the verdict, but I think the attorneys on both sides made some big mistakes. Lynn2574. Thank you for the super chat. First of all, I want to appreciate all you guys that agree with the verdict, even though you know that I don't agree with the verdict, even though I am rationalizing and understanding the verdict, and I did not predict this verdict. I thought he would be found guilty on something, but aside from well, I shouldn't say that, because this morning I was talking to my husband and he was like, oh, they're gonna find him guilty on some and not guilty, and I was like, I think this is gonna be an acquittal. And it was after I saw the judge joking around with one of the jurors. I was like, it's gonna be an acquittal. They're far too jovial. Jurors are very jovial when they're about to acquit because no one's going to jail. And if they're see, I gotta go, guys. All right, love you guys. Talk to you later. Be well. Bye. Hey, Leah.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Give me 1 second.
No problem.